Welcome back, everyone. I hope everybody's doing well at this point in the term. We're going to talk today about tactical approaches to design. This is something that you may recall me briefly introducing in ARC 371 if you took that course, but we're going to frame this now today more in light of complexity theory. And we want to think about tactical approaches as replacing the design of urban objects with the choreography of urban processes. All right, so I want to start by walking through a few different examples of tactical projects and what this means. So here's an example of a block in Oakland, California, and it was a vacated city block. None of these businesses could survive, and so it was just empty. Now you could think, well, how do we go about revitalizing that particular area? And one thing you can imagine is that if one shop moves in, then there is a problem, because even if that shop is potentially a very successful business, say you open a cafe and it's really a lovely cafe and there's nothing wrong with your business model, and you serve great sandwiches and everyone should love your place. What do you think is the problem in terms of complex system if that is a very fit agent, but it's sitting here on an empty block? So think about that for a second. What's involved in a complex system? Agents, information, resources. So what's missing? I hope that you're all thinking, well, gee, resources are missing. If you don't have enough people coming into the neighborhood, if you don't have walk-by traffic, then who's going to stop into your business? People have to make it a special destination to come to. They might not notice it. It's not on their radar. It's not a neighborhood you come to. There aren't enough resources to fuel the system. So even though this could be a really, really effective little shop, if you don't have enough sort of critical mass in that area, then there's no way for us to find out whether that could potentially be a good shop. So in other words, if we put a shop here and it failed, we don't know whether that's an agent failure based on the agent fitness itself or based on the resource availability that the agent simply can't tap into. So in order to kind of safeguard this problem, what the city decided to do was say, all right, well, this entire block is empty anyway. So why don't we offer 6 months of free rent all along that city block, and we'll offer the space to 7 startup businesses, which means that all the storefronts are filled. We have, for the businesses, a very low risk entry because they get 6 months free rent. They can find out whether their business model works. And then they also have the benefit of now suddenly they're not in isolation. Suddenly it's a thing that if 2 or 3 of the businesses start to attract people, then that might fuel another business to succeed, and so on. You get spin-off value, spin-off benefits by being co-located. So in this instance, what happened was that a number of the businesses were successful, and those that were successful were able to then start paying rent. A few of the businesses weren't successful, but there was better information that the reason for that lack of success wasn't the fact that there was no resources to drive business, but maybe that it just wasn't that a business model. And you could tell that comparatively by the fact that there were some businesses that were able to transition into free rent. So then what happened with the vacated spaces where businesses didn't succeed, there was a new series of businesses that opened in, again with this 6 months free rent, that had a chance to test this environment and see if they succeeded, and eventually you fill up the entire block. So I think this is an amazing example of a kind of an adaptive exploration discovery to find out what are the fitness possibilities within this given city block. Now, of course, there's a bit of contingency here, because it could be that if there was a slightly different composition of those 7 initial startup businesses, then there might have been synergies between 2 businesses where a business that failed actually could have succeeded. But at least by having 7 different startup businesses, you're basically increasing that network possibility of there being synergies. And this is where we get into that network theory, that the more connections is better. The more businesses you have, like if you have 20 businesses on that block, then there's more possibilities that if there are to be spin-off benefits of co-location, then you will find them. Maybe I need to outline a little bit more what I mean by spin-off benefits of co-location. The idea being that sort of a little bit the rich get richer, or success breeds success, but often there's kind of synergetic relationships that if I'm enjoying dress shopping in 2 or 3 shops along here, then after I've gone through 2 or 3 shops, I'm tired and so I want a cup of coffee. Then if there's a coffee business next door, then that coffee business isn't only benefiting directly from people who maybe come specifically to get a cup of coffee, but the spin-off benefits that there are enough other businesses on the block that people who didn't think that they wanted a cup of coffee will realize, oh, gee, look, coffee, that smells good. I think I'll go in there. Okay. So this idea of low risk entry and critical mass, again, we have multiple agents testing the niche value in parallel, and you're going to get evolution happening faster the more agents you have in the system. Okay, so here's another example of a tactical project. This is the Play Me, I'm Yours project, and it's gone viral. There are all kinds of these projects across North America and in Europe, and I'm sure in other Southeast Asia probably, but the one that I'm going to start with is one of the first ones, which was in Toronto. And the idea was that they placed 41 pianos around the city at a variety of locations. And these became the sites of impromptu concerts, sing-alongs, gatherings. And basically they wanted to see how pianos might activate underused urban sites. So they distribute them at 41 different sites. Now, the reason that that we can think about these as being tactical projects is that they're much more about, you can almost imagine, guerrilla tactics. We're going to try these little provisional tests and see what happens. And through these provisional tests, we'll learn something. So in this instance, you can imagine that maybe some of these pianos are played all the time. They really are social activators. People are itching to have that notion of a community collective space where they can hear music and interact. And other pianos might just sit completely empty where no one plays them for weeks on end. That is a kind of learning. What have we learned when we realize that some sites, if you put a piano there, become activated and other sites don't? Well, I mean, we could be learning that, gee, I guess maybe we should take some of those pianos that aren't activated and test them in other sites where they might be more useful or more activated. We also might say, well, maybe this location, say this is the one where it's used of all the 41 pianos, this one is the one that's played the most. Maybe that then becomes a site where we say, you know what, maybe we should put a little amphitheater there or put some other cultural amenities there and test that this location actually has some opportunities for civic vibrancy that is remaining untapped in some way. So the idea is maybe there's this latent social capacity within these sites, and we want to probe that latent social capacity. Now we could probe it in other ways. For example, maybe we could say, rather than pianos, maybe this is a basketball hoop. And we put 41 basketball hoops around sites in the city, and we see which are the ones that get used. Now, we could see this in a variety of ways. It could be through reporting, it could be through video monitoring, it could be through sensor detectors. But we could go from the low tech to the high tech. But the point is, there is something about the sort of rate of use that is providing us with information about the success of a kind of niche. And this is the warming huts in Winnipeg. I keep coming back to Winnipeg because I've got lots of great examples of it. But the warming huts was a really interesting project. And again, I know I talked about this in ART 371, but this is just a bit of a refresher for you. So in Winnipeg, it's extraordinarily cold. The city is known as being colder than Mars in the winter. And so we have these rivers that run through the center of the city, but the rivers were basically never used. They just froze over and become sort of this forgotten backyard of the city. So a number of years ago, an architect by the name of Peter Hargraves moved to the city and thought, what are some ways in which we could take this sort of latent amenity, this latent winter amenity, and see if it can be a source of new activation. So a bit of background is that in Winnipeg there is a downtown site called the Forks, which is it's a marketplace, parks area, festival, gathering space. It's the site of former rail yards that was retrofitted, and I worked on that project for about 5 years as an urban designer. And one of the things the Forks had begun to do is they're right on the riverfront, so they plowed a trail for skating along the river. And the trail actually extended a few miles. It went quite a long way. But you'd get one or two skaters that would skate along the trail occasionally in the wintertime. Really, the Forks was popular for its summer use because everyone would come and enjoy the waterfront and enjoy the parks, etc. So Peter Hargraves, this architect, approached the Forks and said, would you be okay with us helping us with the setup of these little warming huts that could be along the river trail that you've plowed? But they won't really be warming huts, literally. They'll be more about sort of the idea of warmth, the idea of activation. And these will basically be public art installations done by teams of architects and artists. So our firm, 546, we were involved the first year, the first 5 huts. This was ours, Sunspot, which I helped to build and erect in minus 40-degree temperatures. And you actually crawl up in the middle and the inside of it, and you can sit in the inside of this hovering orb. And we did this in conjunction with an artist by the name of Eva Tarsha, who's worked on a number of kind of dot series or spot series. And then this is another one which has sort of been very, very widely published, which is the Hochhat, which is Hoch is coziness, means coziness. So from these first 5 new huts, which were done on a $10,000 budget, basically the project was successful, so they repeated it. The huts that were resilient, that lasted, that could be remounted, they returned. Ones that you know, broke down in the elements, or one actually burnt down, unfortunately, those ones don't return. So over the years, you begin to accumulate a collection of these huts, and there's more and more and more population of this on the river. So what has happened over the years, and the warming huts competition has been going on for 10 years now, and I'm working on a book about that project, is that now winter use of the river is actually the most popular time of site use at the Forks compared to summer use. So, which is astounding for a city that is this cold, that more people gravitate to the Forks now in the winter because they want to experience the warming huts. And it's meant that now people are on the river all the time. And there's been a whole host of spin-off events. So now there's a restaurant that goes up every year on the river for 3 weeks, and it sells out all of its seatings. Toronto has mimicked Winnipeg because of this project's success and done something called the warming stations. And there's also been a summer counterpart to the warming huts, which is called Cool Gardens, and I was involved in curating that. So the idea that in the winter you need to be warmed, in the summer we curated gardens that were meant to be spots of relaxation in the downtown. But that's some of the history. My point is, with this, that this is a kind of a tactical approach to exploring, could the rivers actually be activated? We don't have to spend a lot of money and do a big feasibility study and do a lot of community consultations. All we needed to do was start 1 year with 5 huts at $10,000 a piece and see, do people come or do they not come? And you know what? People came. And it was like, oh, there's carrying capacity for this. So let's add another 5 huts, and then another, and then another. And so over the years, you wind up discovering that the city actually has a huge carrying capacity for people using the river, if only it has those right agents there. And these become these sort of agents. And the agents themselves are competing with each other to find out which ones can be replicated and rebuilt year after year after year. Okay, so this other examples of this kind of testing of latent potentials is Pop Rocks in Vancouver. These are a number of massive beanbags that go along one city block. They're shaded with umbrellas, and they invite citizens to socialize, rest, eat, or read a book in the heart of the city. Really, this is reinventing how people occupy urban space. And it acts as a call for greater provisions of public spaces. So, you know, if these become populated in the evening, if there is enough carrying capacity that the city can actually populate an entire city block and have it be active and full and engaged, then it means, you know what, we need more public space in the city. So you don't have to build a big public space and find out, you know, will they come? You can actually test this provisionally in this incremental manner. And the most famous example of this which I know I talked about in ARC 371, is Times Square in New York, where initially the street merchants were very resistant to closing the street to pedestrian traffic. And then a temporary installation went up of plastic chairs, and it was wildly popular, and it meant more business for the merchants, and it became permanent. So this is a kind of a provisional testing for fitness, because if no one had sat in those chairs, if businesses had gone down, then we go, okay, well, that failed. But at least it failed fast and it failed cheap. And then we can try something else, or maybe try another neighborhood and see what can work there. Oh, I just wanted to show you the example of, again, this sort of provisional testing. This is the restaurant that appeared on the river in Winnipeg. And really, it sort of speaks to this changing perception of winter activity, where you have one frozen river, one table for 20, 3 weeks, 3 settings per night, or the seatings per night, sorry, so 3 meals at different times, and minus 30 degrees Celsius weather. And if you were to have held a community consultation process and asked people, do you want to do this? Then probably most people would say, are you crazy? There's no way this could possibly be successful. But it turns out it's unbelievably successful. Okay, so a common orientation to these projects that I've shown you are this idea of LQC, which is coined by someone named Eric Reynolds: lighter, quicker, cheaper. And in a way, you can think about this as kind of almost like this idea of mutation. We've been trying to figure out how can physical architectural space change and mutate and evolve. Well, one way is to make it lighter, make it cheaper, make it quicker, make it more provisional. And then things that are good, we can then solidify those things. And things that are not so good can remain ephemeral and then disappear. Further, the idea is to create juxtapositions for novel spatial connections, to probe lightly with low investment and failure being acceptable, and to explore widely to get feedback on a multiplicity of fit configurations. So when I say explore widely, then, if you just put 3 pianos in 3 different civic sites, and one gets played and 2 don't, then you don't know, okay, is that just a statistical anomaly of the sites we picked, or is it really that 2/3 of pianos are unfit? But if you explore widely, if you have 41 pianos, 41 agents that are all sort of probing the urban environment, and one is wildly successful and the other 40 are never used, we know there's something special going on in that one location. That can't just sort of be a statistical anomaly. Something special is happening there. So it means we can look more closely at that situation and go, what is causing that to be a site where this ability to activate the space is so present? So this is a quote by Stephen Marshall. He writes, "The task of city planning has become less one of producing the simple order of rational urban plans, but instead one of how to best generate and maintain functional complexity, or complex functionality, which was traditionally possessed by cities." And when he says traditionally possessed by cities, he's talking about that complex functionality of medieval cities that sort of evolved slowly, incrementally over hundreds of years, where everything sort of seemed to be in its place. We've tried to fast track that process now and make master plans where whole new areas are built up in a very short framework of time. And so the question is, and he continues, the somewhat paradoxical challenge of planning then becomes one of how to plan a kind of complexity that seems to have arisen naturally in traditional cities without planning. Stephen Marshall, actually, I believe, is the other author that I suggest in the course readings list. He writes about cities, evolutions, and complexity, and has a very creative way of thinking about this. Okay. So tactical approaches as a methodology for complex unfolding. I want to take you now into a case study of a project, again, that I worked on as a competition entry. These projects are very close to my heart, but also, honestly, I would show you more other projects, except there are not that many firms doing this in the world. The landscape practices are a bit of an exception, but there are not that many architects who are working in this way. So the competition scope. This is Portage in Maine. In Winnipeg, you can see all the snow on the ground. This is our busiest major civic intersection. And because it was so busy, they basically built an underground walkway to take you across the street. They put up big barricades so you couldn't cross the street. So it's car friendly, pedestrian unfriendly. And this is not a great environment. So the city wanted to have a competition for how to re-envisage this intersection. Pedestrians had been pushed underground by barricades, and the surrounding areas were also suffering from a lack of pedestrian activity. There were many vacated sites over here, surface parking lots, or boarded up shops. So the people conceiving the competition, again, they saw the problem as being something you could solve at the intersection. And we saw the problem as being one driven by relational factors that implicated the downtown as a whole. So we said, look, you can't put a Band-Aid on this. I'm pointing at the screen as though you can see my finger, sorry. To use the little cursor here. You can't solve the problem by putting a Band-Aid over here. You have to really look at the whole network of things, the network of energy, that this is just one node within that energetic network. And we have to look at healing all of the nodes in order to support this intersection being effective and lively, and what the organizers wanted. So we took a look, we stepped back, and we took a look at the downtown area as a whole. And basically, we looked at 7 different aspects in 3 different parameters. And maybe it's best to start with these 7 here. They read: roofs to inhabit, walls to scale, streets to claim, plazas to program, surfaces to alter, businesses to invest, and lanes to liven. Essentially, what we did is we took an inventory of what we felt were underutilized urban potential. And we thought, could this urban potential actually be offering something more? And it's sitting there as latent capacity. And if we could just activate that latent capacity, something more would happen there. What could happen with all these back lanes? What could happen with all these rooftops? What could happen with all these empty street walls? Then we said, well, what are the kinds of things that happen? What are the kinds of resources in the way that sort of drive things to be that drive urban conviviality, urban pleasure, urban interest? So we said, well, okay, and all of these precede by the word urban, but I won't say urban every time. Play, voyeurism, so we like to see each other. Voice, so we like to sort of have a chance to vocalize, plays that are in open air, anything that involves sort of speaking to others. Cheap, so people go for shopping and they like to get bargains, and Winnipeg's a bargain city. Trade, sin, and this is sort of interesting, but you think about, there's a lot of things that people like to do in cities because there's, people go to Amsterdam, they like to go to the red light district, right? People go to the cities, they like to go drinking, they like to be rowdy. There's all these things that are kind of, a little sinful that we like about cities. And extreme is the last one. So like, what are the things that, people like extreme sports, they like extreme activities, they want to be stimulated in some way. So we had this matrix, right? This matrix, and then this matrix. This was the days of the week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Okay, so 7 days of the week. So we can say, all right, the spaces here, these are niches. The programs here, these are kind of different species of things. And the days over here are iterations. And let's just start to cross them and see what happens speculatively, not literally, but just speculatively. What would happen if you cross these? So we activate some permutations. And these matrix permutations act as fitness probes. So if we were to say, well, what's a Saturday in July, streets to claim, and urban play? Okay, maybe that's street hockey, right? Maybe we say that's something we're going to populate it with. So in the same way, this is almost becomes a kind of differential machine, because each one of these intersections, urban voice with walls to scale, with on a Tuesday, right? What does that provoke in you? What could be walls to scale and urban voice? Okay, well, maybe that's actually a street projection, right? Maybe that's you're projecting a movie on a screen or something, or live Instagram feeds on a screen art that's being projected. So so this becomes sort of the question of each one of these almost prompts you to imagine something. It creates those juxtapositions that Koolhaas talked about in Parc de la Villette, and says, well, by overlaying these different juxtapositions, we're suggesting something that could happen. And if we get a suggestion, we say, okay, let's do this. Let's do this as a pop-up intervention. So this is a pop-up street hockey. And another day might be, what were some that we had? We had free Wi-Fi, which was, you know, urban cheap. We had football on the streets. We had, in Spain, they have the running of the bulls. So we thought, well, we'll have the running of the bisons in downtown Winnipeg. We had all kinds of different sort of notions of how we could activate this. The act of generating these spatial variants then can be seen as analogous to exploring a fitness landscape where different environments have these different latent capacities that could potentially support particular species or actions. And then what we do is with these tactical probes, they are kind of actors within that landscape that are testing whether they can survive, determining where and how they could best orient themselves within a particular context. So when we go back, we can say, okay, well, you know, maybe if we have like urban trade and we say we're going to close an urban street on a particular day to have an open air urban market, maybe that street isn't the right street. But if we don't make that the permanent location, if we test it on a different day on a different street, then we can sort of say, okay, is there capacity for this? And maybe there isn't, right? But at least by sort of doing these light tests, we can say, let's not just do one tactical intervention, let's do lots of tactical interventions in lots of different locations to find out what can happen. And so basically, sorry, go back one. So basically, each of the intersections of that matrix is kind of a test probe of a particular activity. And then from that test probe, we get feedback, right? We find out, oh, lots of people showed up or no one showed up. This tells us something about the underlying fitness landscape of downtown Winnipeg. And then from that information, we can then have selection pressure of what kinds of activities survive or fail, which then leads to certain mutations, and we get the next round of iterations. We try something else the following week, we try something else on Tuesday, we try another location. So we have iterations, mutations, steering, and feedback processes that are driving the sort of system evolution. So that was effectively the project. I think that was my last slide for this project. We did some other things as well, but the idea was that if we fixed everything around that intersection, then the intersection itself becomes no problem. Then we just take down the barricades. And the way we took down the barricades is we said one of our tactical pop-up events would be that we would invite everyone for a pop-up sledgehammer party where they would just destroy the barricades, and then the pieces of the barricades would be sold on eBay like fragments of the Berlin Wall that was taken down, so that this would sort of be also creating a bit of a cultural prompt and helping build the myth of Portage and Main, creating a new myth. So we talked about, is the space a space, or is there a mythology behind the space? We wanted to have a big event that sort of created this myth, and then all these other tactical interventions that would then go on to sustain the idea of Portage and Main, rather than just putting some big sculpture at Portage and Main. So you can imagine most entries put some big sculpture at Portage and Main, right? We're focused on the form. And what I'm trying to orient you to in this class is really to focus on the process, not the form. The relations that would lead to people being at Portage and Main, not so much just a physical thing, but still figuring out what those relations would be from an architectural mindset, not from a political mindset or from other sort of policy mindsets, but really using architecture as something that can change the environment. And, you know, Peter Hargraves with the Warming Hut transformed how Winnipeggers use the city. One guy, the CEO at the Forks, who's Paul Jordan, who's a great guy who says yes to everything, and half a dozen firms that helped out that first year to make things happen. And we got that seed going. And then you had more feedback, and we had this sort of reinforcing feedback loop of the more people who come to the Forks for the wintertime, the more it becomes a thing, and then the rich get richer. Okay, so I hope some of this is exciting for you. I actually presented this particular project as a poster presentation a number of years ago through my work at TU Delft. And so you can see the matrix and this idea. This is one of the diagrams that we have of emergent qualities, foot traffic, et cetera. So all of these things happening on the matrix, and how the system worked. So we talked about summarizing that the program is species, spaces are the niches, and times are the iterations. So when I am asking you to do a poster presentation of a complexity project, what I'm asking you is really to be able to speak about an urban intervention using this kind of complexity language, talking about feedback, talking about fitness landscapes, information, and energy, highlighting that so that I understand that you're able to describe a project from a complexity standpoint, but also developing the project as a complex adaptive system, okay? So that you can tell me how you are leveraging something in ways that employ complexity to have emergent fit solutions. And this is sort of about the kind of text and spacing that is nice on a research poster. Some graphics, some kind of charting things, some illustrations, right? Images that are illustrative, and then text that is, much more succinct than you would have in a paper. Okay, so we want to think about thinking in this tactical way where the designer is no longer designing a thing, but they're more a steward of evolutionary processes. My goal in design right now is to try to figure out how can I speed up the evolutionary capacity of cities by generating possibilities where failure is an option, but just fail fast. Don't make really big, expensive failures, make really cheap, light failures. Lots of tests means chances of finding good strategies. The more testing you do, the more options you generate, the more you're going to find those fit possibilities. And then once we found them, then those are the ones we can make more permanent and invest in. They also provide a way to get around bureaucratic lock-in by creating a pathway to creative city uses. Now, one interesting thing was that normally the warming huts were built without building permits. And the way that happened is that rivers fall under federal jurisdiction, and there's provincial jurisdiction for building codes, but there's no federal jurisdiction. And because the rivers were frozen and we were building on top of the rivers, it just fell through the cracks of bureaucratic stuff. So we were able to make that happen, which is pretty cool. But from another way of looking at that, and I did mention one burnt down. The organizers got a little bit more careful about the building code issues after that. But sometimes bureaucrats don't want to make a big change because they feel that it's risky. But if you say, oh, it's not a big change, I just want to close off this block for a week or for 3 evenings or something, then it's sort of like it's not high stakes. So you can actually test things quickly. And if it really is a problem, then it was only a problem for a couple of days. But if it's fine, then you can then say, oh, yeah, well, could we make it 5 evenings a week or 6 evenings a week or make it permanent, right? And so the city bureaucrats also have these entrenched interests, and they don't want to get in trouble. But these sort of like light urban probes offer a way in which we can test fitness. The other thing is about information about relative fitness of interventions is provided at a high level of resolution due to being enacted rather than forecasted. So this is something very important to me. And I talked about it last year with many of you when I talked about community consultation processes. People are very poor predictors of what they actually want to do. So you want to sort of get the proof is in the pudding, or you see the evidence by the people on the ground. So don't worry about what people say, just do stuff and then see what people actually do. And that's how you actually learn. And that information, the information when you actually see people doing stuff, is the most valuable information. Whatever surveys you do, community consultations, etc., all of that has got a lot more information distortion. And we know one thing about complex systems is that you want the information to be valid, right? I've got my little beehive over behind me, right? They don't want to have some propaganda be saying, hey, I found like a really nice flower, you can come pollinate, it's this way. Yeah, come this way. Sure, you guys all go over there. I'll go get the really good pollen over here, right? Like they don't have the ability to send out false signals, but human societies do. So then we have to be mindful of what are the kind of signals that we want to actually be sending. Okay, I think that must be it. Yes, it is. I am going to talk more about some other issues later in the class, but we will leave it for there. Thanks so much.